Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, August 14th, 2017. We are live for one more shot at the show before leaving on vacation. Like I said in the Morning Post, it's a hell of a time / a pretty good time, maybe, to be taking a vacation. How was your weekend, everybody? No, seriously, how was it? Bill in Portland, Maine. Are you back in Portland, Maine, Bill? Asks as he lets everyone know that Daily Kos Radio is live now. Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman. You can reach me on Twitter during the show at Kagro X on Twitter. Kagro X wonders casually aloud. So, how was your weekend, America? There you go. I've done it twice now. How was your weekend? Mine was pretty interesting. It had more Nazis in it than I thought it was going to, but thankfully they weren't hanging around my house, but they weren't too far away. Scary, yikes, etc. Lots to talk about. I mean, there's no way. How do you do the opening of a morning show and be like, well, I think I'll treat Nazis properly this morning, and also have some witty banter as we go on with these things. It's going to be rather difficult, but there's a lot to talk about. Greg Dworkin will be with us. That makes things a lot easier because he always brings that level-headed approach. Plus the news clips, so we can make sure that we're not missing anything. But yeah, we're going to be talking about Nazis and the fact that we have a president here in the United States of America who doesn't have it in him to figure out how to definitively denounce Nazism. It's a little strange. I wasn't expecting that. But then again, I wasn't expecting all of my equipment to be functioning and firing on all cylinders either, and yet it has. I learned an awful lot about the way the equipment works over the weekend, as I spent a lot of time recording some shows so as not to leave you entirely without new content during the break, although I have not yet completed new shows for every single day. However, one, I'm going to redouble my efforts, and two, it's possible I may bring some equipment with me and record on the fly. We're doing a lot to try and make sure that you're not left all alone at this time, and of course there's always Daily Kos, and they're well ahead of the curve on all these things. They're always a lot of my source for news, and if you think I get the news early, boy, you should see what's going on over at Daily Kos. All right, so all functioning properly so far. We also have indication that we may get a chance to talk to Armando a little bit later on. I know we've had a lot of Armando, and it's good. It's a good thing, and there's a lot of Armando fans are going to be happy. It's fantastic. He was on the ground at Netroots Nation this weekend, as many of you were, so we're going to want to catch up on some of that. And not all of the news out of Netroots Nation and the events surrounding it and the discussion surrounding it is universally positive. Some repair work, I think, that needs to be done. We'll talk about that a little bit later on, but that's always the case anytime the left, the Democrats, the Netroots, more than two people who are sane get together. So we'll turn our attention to that later on. In the meantime, Greg is here with us. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. Doing great.
What do you think of Nazis?
I hate them.
All right. Moving on. That was easy.
It was, actually, and I don't know why it's not easy for everybody. What I wrote on the Pundit Roundup this morning is, remember, there are not two sides or both sides to being a Nazi. There's only one side, the side of good, and you'd best be against them, which is the side of evil. So they aren't always losers in mom's basement. They're bankers and businessmen and politicians, and they're just like you, except they chose wrong.
Yes. So
it can happen here. Don't get the idea that they're a bunch of, fat losers in ducky pajamas, chasing after hot women. There's this famous meme that goes around the internet like that, not to fat shame. But the point is that it could be anybody. And the idea that, we know them because they dress in white hoods or they have big swastika armbands isn't always true. They could be anybody, and it's still wrong. And it's not going to be mainstream just because they happen to look just like you and me.
Right. Although some of them are freakishly different in the way they
are,
look.
And when I was trying to figure out
all kinds
after Donald Trump's remarks about both sides and everybody is, if these guys are such, misunderstood people, where are all the black Nazis?
It's not an equal opportunity employer. It doesn't.
Where are the Jewish Nazis? I can't find them.
Every once in a while, people come up with something that they claim is one or another of this sort of person, but you'd think they'd be out of numbers if they existed. That is odd. They do tend. It's one of those exclusive clubs, I guess.
Well,
like
the
Mar-a-Lago.
thing is, it's usually wrong and a mistake. Godwin's law and all of that to invoke Hitler and Nazis when you're talking about American politics. But ever since Donald Trump was running for president, that's been suspended.
Yes.
And now we see why.
Well, yeah, including, for your regular routine reporting after a terrorist attack, we have a little bit of that too. A terrorist literature found in the car of the murderer over the weekend who ran down protesters or counter-protesters in Charlottesville, killing one and injuring 20 or so more. And, so in that sense, the story takes the normal and expected shape and trajectory, and yet still
domestic terrorism.
Yeah, any kind of terrorism that for some reason we're in love with reporting the next day that we found extremist literature in their car. In this case, the car was actually the weapon, so I guess it's a little bit more relevant. But it's like a favorite reporting point after all terrorist attacks, foreign and domestic, and in other words, the evidence couldn't pile up any higher that this is just regular, plain old terrorism, and we ought to say so. And the president, no, but he's been clear about that. He doesn't criticize people who say good things about him. That's
right.
His
well,
policy,
there's two people he doesn't criticize: white nationalists and Putin.
Yeah, and there's a lot of Putin's one.
Everybody
guy.
Else, you're fair game. Everybody.
Yeah, so yeah, and literally this morning he's back to the same thing. He's got no time for figuring out what to say about Nazis, but plenty of time. Oh well, Democrats and trade deals. Let me criticize a little bit of that. I'll hit a golf ball or two.
Well, the fact is that there's a tremendous amount of blowback and reaction and criticism, which is actually mounting and getting worse today. Let me start with the New York Times for some definitional stuff, which will annoy people, but I think it's worthwhile at least making the point. Times writes, a question's been posed in a puzzled whisper in many of the nation's living rooms and newsrooms ever since Donald J. Trump's triumph in this month's presidential election. What exactly is white nationalism?
Okay.
And the reason to ask the question is, what do you call these people? Eric Kaufman, a professor of politics at Birkbeck University in London, has spent years studying the ways that ethnicity intersects with politics. While most researchers in that field focus on ethnic minorities, Professor Kaufman does the opposite. He studies the behavior of ethnic majorities, particularly whites in the United States and Britain. White nationalism, he said, is the belief that national identity should be built around white ethnicity, and that white people should therefore maintain both a demographic majority and dominance of the nation's culture and public life. So, like white supremacy, white nationalism places the interests of white people over those of other racial groups. White supremacists and white nationalists both believe racial discrimination should be incorporated into law and policy, and you can see, therefore, why, for example, Trump is comfortable with Jeff Sessions, because Trump himself is a white supremacist. Not a white nationalist like
I don't know that
a
he
white
knows
supremacist. And Sessions is kind of in the intersection between the two.
Yes. I mean, a lot of things are unconscious for Donald Trump. I don't mean to lessen the severity of it by saying that a lot of his racism is unconscious. Racism, it doesn't matter, especially if you're the target of the racism. But, a person who rises to the level of President of the United States is supposed to be someone intellectually capable of rising to recognize their inherent biases rather than fostering them and turning them into policy.
And it's supposed to be president of all of us, and we will in fact get to that. Now, some will see the distinction, the article says, between white nationalism and white supremacy as a semantic sleight of hand, but although many white supremacists are white nationalists and vice versa, Professor Kaufman says the terms are not synonyms. White supremacy is based on a racist belief that white people are innately superior. White nationalism is about maintaining political and economic dominance, not just the numerical majority of cultural hegemony. In other words, it's not good enough that we're superior. We have to actually put it into practice and vote suppress and do other things to make sure that we remain in charge.
Yes, you can be
So one is like the practical arm, and the other is the theoretic arm.
I could see it that way. Yes. Well, interesting. I mean, there are a number of distinctions, but neither one is good. You shouldn't worry about anybody saying, well, one's acceptable and the other isn't. They're both unacceptable.
Right. And because it's Monday and we have to round up the weekend, I want to, and this is all in the pundit roundup, I have a whole series of quotes from conservatives, not that liberals and not that Democrats and not that progressives weren't denouncing this, but Tim Miller.
It's extra special when they do.
It is. There's a disturbing denial among conservative elites about seriousness and increasing prevalence of white nationalism. I hope this ends that. And before we get to the actual quotes from various named people, I think it's important to put a marker here. I've talked about in the past about how important it is to have shared values and to share norms, a binding narrative for the country, that we're a fair and equal society, things like that we're, a society based on rule of law, that everybody has equal opportunities. It's a myth, but it's an important one. It's an important driving factor to what we strive for, even when we're not there. And therefore, it's really important that the politically correct thing to do is to denounce Nazism because there are not two sides. In other words, it's more than just, saying the words. I saw Eric Lipton, for example, of the New York Times, questioning whether Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz are totally sincere in their denunciations, because are they not just positioning themselves politically? That's not the point. The absence of saying something like that is huge. We see that in the president. It's important to say these things and to establish these norms. And so whoever it comes from, the very fact that they say it, be it Mike Pence or Ivanka, it's acceptable that they denounce Nazism. It's important that they do. If you skip that, if you say, well, I'm not going to be politically correct, I don't have to say we hate Nazis. I don't have to denounce them.
Yeah.
What that does is that unleashes the demons. And that's what Trump has done. And we're seeing the results of that in Charlottesville. So it's perfectly acceptable for the conservatives to come out and say this is ridiculous, we don't accept this. It's important that they do, and you don't have to question their motives and how sincere they are.
Yes.
That they say it is important.
I mean, it's okay as an extracurricular activity if you want to question
not the only thing. You got to back it up with what you do later. But it's important that these things be said.
There is a tremendous value in that. There are bigger and better things to do. But
Trump's doing it.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and it highlights the fact that it's missing. And I mean, I don't think that there's anything wrong with using the statements of conservatives to underline how ridiculous it is that Trump is missing the easiest political play in American history. To be honest,
CNN World Affairs columnist Frida Gitis notes a Miami Herald piece entitled we all heard Trump's dog whistle, giving white supremacists, his okay. And she adds, Trump's dog whistle was meant to be heard only by white supremacists, but it malfunctioned and we all heard it. And then Don Harwood and CNBC, this is all in the pundit roundup, has this long list of all the times Trump has been racist, going back to, Fred Trump and the KKK stuff. There's a picture of Donald Trump with mom and dad in KKK regalia. Right? My request for the cartoonist, since everybody always goes back and interviews Trump voters and say, do you still support him? I think that there should be a cartoon of a New York Times reporter asking a Klansman and a neo-Nazi, do you still support Trump?
Well, do they have bars that they hang out in? Chris Arnade could do it.
Yeah, or McDonald's. So the whole thing is that there's a long, long list of things that Trump has done. And Harwood says the more obscure the president's actions, the likelier Republican leaders have been to remain quiet for fear of antagonizing his core supporters. now that we've defined who those core supporters are. But the graphic, deadly events this past weekend and the president's response to them threaten his party with the broader electorate that grows more diverse and more tolerant with every passing year.
Yes.
Trump cast white supremacists and neo-Nazis carrying torches onto the University of Virginia campus as morally equivalent to counter-protesters advocating racial equality. And by the way, there are people in the Trump White House who are still doing that.
Yes.
His stance, a purposeful choice by a president who relishes singling out so many others for criticism, places him at odds with the values of the nation he was elected to serve. There's that values thing we were talking about. That raises risk for elected officials who stand with Trump at a moment of legal as well as political jeopardy. It further complicates prospects for the Republican agenda on tax cuts, health care, and other issues. It increases the possibility that Trump's presidency itself will be cut short. I think that it was an inflection point over the weekend, and yes, it was that important.
Yeah,
so
I think
we do have shared values, even with political opposition, and Trump violates them, and it's going to be his ruin.
Yes. It is not a signal to start holding your breath. I never counsel that, but you're right.
Right.
I will agree. This is a big. Do I count the difference between turning points and inflection points as subtle enough? I guess so.
Well, inflection points can happen. They can inflect the other way, too. Turning points imply it's just one way and then you can't go back. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's an inflection point because I think what happened mattered, and as to what other things happen, we'll have to see. There can be many inflection points. Gaddy Epstein on Twitter says, not many presidents could make threatening nuclear war the second worst thing he did in a week.
Yeah, that's true. That's a unique accomplishment.
It is.
I think.
Jennifer Rubin says, Trump will respond to the criticism. Number one, I was kidding. Number two, the fake news is at fault. He's already done that. And number three, I'm the least racist person ever. Of course, again, John Harwood lists all the times that's not true. So it's an interesting piece. One of the best pieces I saw so far is Mike Gerson. Great magnum opus op-ed. Trump babbles in the face of tragedy. If great words can heal and inspire, base words can corrupt. Trump has been delivering the poison of prejudice in small but increasing doses. In Charlottesville, the effect became fully evident, and the president had no intention of decisively repudiating his work. So he puts it right in Trump's lap. What do we do with a president who is incapable or unwilling to perform his basic duties? What do we do when he's incapable of outrageous things? What do we do with a president who provides barely veiled cover for the darkest instincts of the human heart? These questions lead to the dead end of political realism, a hopeless recognition of limited options. But the questions intensify, and in fact, that's what's happening today. Well, Susan Demis, who's a columnist in Michigan, pick a side. There's no neutrality when it comes to Nazis. And Andy Slavitt, who's been covering healthcare, notes yesterday, meaning the Charlottesville protest, was racist fantasy, open carry, shields and helmets, policed by white militia, with the mainstream media covering it, outrage only after the violence. And then the White House comes out and says, well, both sides are fault.
That's a good point. I mean, I don't know that we get this kind of inflection point but for that attack. I mean, the fact that there's a major Nazi rally in a major university town might go unremarked upon, more or less.
Well, the Tiki Torch company said we don't want to have anything to do with it. They were actually better and stronger on their denunciation than the White House was.
Yes. Well, it tarnishes, I don't know. I mean, it is interesting. I guess it's amazing if Trump comes out of this thinking, well, sure, they said something. It tarnishes their brand in a way that it doesn't tarnish my brand. It burnishes my brand to have had Nazi murder going on my watch while I'm playing golf.
Remember David Newart, Orca?
Yes.
Covers a lot of hate group stuff, and Sarah Posner, who's doing it as well. They have a joint piece in Mother Jones called How Trump Took Hate Groups Mainstream, the full story of his connection with far-right extremists. So, it's really kind of hard to hide this stuff.
Yes, well, he's not trying, so you shouldn't either.
Right. Rosie Gray has a piece. The alt-right's rebranding effort has failed in the Atlantic because now it's out in the open.
Yes, right. The idea, I mean, well, we were on to them for a long time, but they've certainly, for anybody who was still holding out about saying, well, I don't know if they're really Nazis per se, I think this probably did it. And this was, again, before they ran anybody over, they were out as Nazis, but that only puts an exclamation point on it.
Russell Moore, Southern Baptist, the so-called alt-right white supremacist ideologies are antichrist and satanic to the core, and we should say so.
Well, All right. I'll look. I mean, you get to say that for yourself. I'll agree. I won't comment on what's anti-Christ or not.
Right. So let's run down some of the Republicans. Marco Rubio, very important for the nation to hear POTUS describe events in Charlottesville for what they are, a terror attack by white supremacists. Cory Gardner, Mr. President, we must call evil by its name. These were white supremacists, and this was domestic terrorism. Yes. Senator Hatch had a good one. The tiki torches may be fueled by citronella, but their ideas are fueled by hate and have no place in civil society. We should call evil by its name. My brother didn't give his life fighting Hitler for Nazi ideas to go unchallenged here at home.
Nah, that was a stronger ending than mention of citronella, but okay.
Yeah. The tragedy in Charlottesville this afternoon was domestic terrorism. We must all condemn hatred and white nationalism. That was Rob Portman. Senator Ted Cruz, I urge the Department of Justice to immediately investigate and prosecute the grotesque act of domestic terrorism. John McCain, white supremacists aren't patriots, they're traitors. Americans must unite against hatred and bigotry. Chuck Grassley, what white nationalists are doing in Charlottesville is homegrown terrorism that can't be tolerated any more than what any extremist does. Rich Lowry had interesting comments on Meet the Press, this one in particular. If these monuments are going to become rallying points for neo-Nazis, maybe they do have to go.
Yes, I did see that. Rich Lowry is still reprehensible, but that's true. He's right about that. And I will add one comment that I also saw circulated. I'll have to find it so I can credit it properly. But just pointing out that this guy who ran over the protesters has done for Confederate monuments what Dylan Roof did for the Confederate battle flag. It's going to become an impossible embarrassment to defend.
Right, exactly. Paul Ryan, the views fueling the spectacle in Charlottesville are repugnant. Let it only serve to unite Americans against this kind of vile bigotry. So, sure, we didn't expect Trump to do this, but it really is uniting people against this. And even National Review has a big editorial group about how this is like totally unacceptable. There's plenty of conservative reaction to this. Again, it's important because a lot of these are never Trumpers, but some of these people have, at least in the past, implicitly supported Trump's agenda. And yes, it's just words, but again, as I said, it's very important that you make sure that you come down on the side of political correctness here and establish that the norm is that Nazis are unacceptable, period.
Yes. Well, some people are doing that and some are not. I will note for the record that those observers of morning television that we rely on have reported that everybody's on the Nazi story except Fox News, which is on Colin Kaepernick.
Yeah, state TV. The state TV propaganda network is exactly what it is.
He kneeled people to death.
But here's an important point about all of that. Trump is desperately trying to keep his own white nationalist base. That's all he has. He's making no efforts whatsoever to get everyone else, and it ain't gonna work.
Well, all right. I'll take it. I hope it doesn't work faster than has been the case so far.
Right. And that was the point of Harwood's piece. That was the point of Rosie Gray's piece about the alt-right's rebranding effort failing. Article in Atlantic today, Yoni Applebaum, take the statues down. A multi-ethnic democracy requires grappling honestly with the past and recognizing the symbols of the Confederacy for what they are. So to your point, that's exactly what's going on here. Here's an interesting one, by the way. An American tourist gave the Nazi salute in Germany, so a stranger beat him up.
Yes, I did see that one tweeted out with the comment of, let's go over, for the continuing debate on whether or not it's right to punch Nazis. Let's take it over to Germany for a second.
I have some very, very good German friends who pointed out that, in Germany, if you tried what they tried in Charlottesville, the whole lot of them would be locked up.
Yeah, well, that's true. It's illegal, and which brings us to another interesting point, which is, of course, as many people observed, in the early stages of the Charlottesville rally, no serious police presence that could be compared in any way to the presence that is brought to bear for Black Lives Matter protests.
Yeah.
I mean, completely different sort of police presence. And this is the second time they've showed up with open flame, which I still think that there's got to be an ordinance about that. No? but apparently not. But although one of the complaints about
these marches keep the skeeters away, you know. So
that's true, and it's nice.
That's good for the
community. Perhaps enjoy it for that reason. But not only that, but I'm also increasingly amazed at the ability of the alt-right to show up in armor and carrying weapons of various sorts, including, of course, long rifles, which we now at this point unfortunately has almost become used to because there's so much focus on Second Amendment rights, and it's almost like a different category of weapon. You can't be snatched up off the street for carrying a gun, but in most places, if you were walking down the street with a sword, they would absolutely stop you, though arms are arms. But these guys keep showing up in makeshift armor and ready to take on the weapons of the riot police, essentially, although they use them on counter-protesters instead. And it's getting really disturbing how easily they can assemble in battle formation at any normal gathering.
Right. We're coming up in our break?
We are, as a matter of fact, and we're about 1 minute away from it, so we can still talk our way through it. But I will point out also that Terry McAuliffe, governor of Virginia, had an interesting point here, which was that the state police made a calculated decision about whether or not to and how to engage with the protesters because, of course, they brought their own militia, and the militia was better armed than the police were. And while that's something that people say all the time, or sometimes they say the criminals are better armed than the police are, sometimes they say the protesters were better armed. But I mean, it's a tacit admission that it was the militia running things there, and the militia who got to decide what happened and who was in control. So we'll pick this up on the other side of our break and play a little outro music that'll serve as a nice cue going forward for these things. We'll see you on the other side. And all righty, we ought to be back from our break. Thanks for hanging out and getting us back to the other side. Thanks, Justice, for the thumbs up. We'll fade our music out here. Greg has checked on the doorbell here. Abby should be on her way out. Okay, and now you're back. Fantastic. Abby's gone. You're back. We didn't hear Abby. That's fine.
Well, Abby sometimes sings along with the music that Justice plays.
All right.
That's sometimes to just put her outside.
That's one of the better uses of our breaks so far, which are shorter and smoother every day, I think.
We hope. So I got this interesting piece here from Tegan Goddard, and although it's a pay piece, I think it's worth reviewing. Tegan does summaries of other people's stuff, but that's fine. He does it really well.
Yes.
And I like supporting him because I like reading what he does, and so I'm a member.
Always credited, always linked. It's an excellent use of the resource.
Trump's strangulation will fail, he writes.
Good.
This piece is only available to Political Wire members, but I'm giving you a sneak preview and a plug, if you want to support him, that'd be great.
Okay. Politicians
use a triangulation strategy to position themselves both above and between the left and right sides of the political spectrum. Bill Clinton did this after the disastrous 1994 midterm elections in an effort to attract a more moderate coalition. The strategy allowed him to bounce back and win re-election handily in 1996. Some say President Trump's recent attacks on the Senate Majority Leader McConnell are part of a similar triangulation strategy, but Amy Walter notes a big difference. Trump has no desire, she says, to expand his coalition to include Democrats. This is a zero-sum game for him. He's not trying to triangulate to gain legislative power. He's attacking Congress to protect himself and his brand at the likely expense of his own party. He's not really a Republican. He's a populist, and he's a member of the Trump party, and anybody else is subject to being thrown under the bus.
Well, I get that. Although people don't want to allow him any separation, I will say he's a Republican. He's just a bad party member.
Well, I'm happy to, join them at the hip when it comes to elections because the Trump party is not on the ballot.
Right.
But his enablers are, and so they should pay the price for that. But the fact of the matter is that he has no loyalty to anybody, certainly not the Republican Party. That's pretty clear. David Frum sees it backfiring badly. Instead, he's positioned himself in such a way that other political actors can triangulate against him. Congressional Republicans by rejecting Trump's indulgence of murderous racism, congressional Democrats by fastening Trump to the widely disliked Ryan McConnell policy agenda. And it's a great reminder that Ryan and McConnell may not see themselves as the same as Trump, but what Ryan and McConnell are trying to do happens to be despised by the American people. In other words, if they got a chance to actually do their agenda, just look at healthcare, people hate it.
Yeah. Well, that is true. And
so they like to run on, I'd like to do this, but I can't, because if they actually did and people saw the results, they'd hate it even more.
Oh, well, give it a shot. I mean, you guys should check that out. I mean, science
they did.
demands.
They tried to give it a shot. They came pretty close.
Well, keep doing it.
And then people started really paying attention to what that agenda was, and it turned out like 17% of the people who were asked about it thought it was a good idea.
Well, okay. Science demands repeated trials is all I'm saying.
Yeah, so they keep trying. And Trump made it worse by not condemning the white nationalist violence in Charlottesville over the weekend. Trump now stands not between the parties or above the parties, but beyond the parties. In some strange political twilight zone where neo-Nazis are seen as constituency not to be insulted. Instead of helping himself politically ahead of next year's midterm, Trump's attempt at triangulation has made him already tough landscape, even tougher for Republicans. Republicans now have to somehow convince moderate voters to want to keep Republicans in control of Congress despite their skepticism of Trump and the GOP agenda, and then they have to convince GOP base voters, who aren't moderates, to come out and vote even though Trump is slamming them for incompetence. It's probably not wise to assume Trump is following some coherent strategy here since he mostly acts impulsively, but if he is, it's not going to work.
All right. Well, I have a suggestion for anybody who wants to know whether Trump is a Republican or not. One thing you could do is go to the floor of the House of Representatives if you're a member of the House, and there are a few of you out there who are, I'm sure. But Democrats, head to the floor, and one privileged motion you can offer at almost any time is a motion to impeach the president. Ask for a vote, see who votes how, and scratch out their party affiliation, and then take a look at who votes yes and who votes no, and I'm pretty sure you will find that the president is a Republican.
Someone pointed out on Twitter, by the way, that if you'll notice, with all the attention being paid to what happened in Charlottesville,
yes,
and Trump tweets and his positioning on this, he stopped threatening North Korea.
He did. It was a terrific weekend for global thermonuclear war threats. And yeah, Guam, that's right. The best week in Washington,
Guam had a great
Guam.
weekend. Best weekend they've had in weeks. Right?
Chris Salitzek, all your office. Yeah. Best weekend in Washington, no doubt about it. Their stock went up, but by the way, he'll credit himself for that, for his the most ludicrous statement I've ever heard about that situation, that Guam tourism was going to double because he mentioned it. Maybe I don't really have any idea why.
But the point people were making is the reason they didn't have to threaten North Korea.
Yes.
And the reason that he was talking as much as he was about Charlottesville, to the extent that he was, is that it all distracts from the Russia problem with Bobby Three Sticks closing in on Trump and his associates.
Well, yes, although I think that investigation, that issue now is definitely qualifies among the general public and American electorate as that thing that you can do while chewing gum. Whether, I don't know which one is which, whether it's the walking or the chewing gum, but that I think everybody's on at least two tracks with that one. I don't
Right, there's Russia and there's everything else.
Yep, pretty much. I mean, that's just background issue.
Yeah, Russia's not going away, and there's no way it's going away. So here's worth a shout out because it just happened this weekend anyway. Mm-hmm. This is from Politico. At Netroots, which just concluded, liberal activists demand full throttle approach to Trump-Russia ties. Progressives resist calls to de-emphasize the focus on Russia probes. And at the Atlanta conference, when you talk to the people who attended, they think Russia's important. When you talk to the candidates say, well, it's important, but we don't want to get distracted, as Chris Murphy's famous line, from healthcare and the other things that people care about. Now, when healthcare was in the news and there were votes, that was true. Yeah, healthcare pretty much seems dead at this particular point in time, despite the best efforts of the Republicans to revive it. They'd like to appoint Joe Manchin to energy, open up a seat, and then, get another vote and then come back to it. But even that, long shot though it is, because Manchin's not stupid, is unlikely to work because there actually are other no votes. They were just happy to let McCain take all the heat for it because basically elected officials are cowards. That's understandable. I mean, their job is to get reelected, and sometimes cowardice is the best way forward.
Very frequently for politicians, yes. So Joe Manchin wasn't fooled by either the play or by the fact that the Department of Energy doesn't have anything to do with coal mining.
Not only that,
Rick Perry fell for that one. He wants out, I guess. Give it to him. I want out of here.
Right, but the point is that Trump is going to embarrass and demean anybody who works with him. And so looking at this, I mean, it's Scaramucci resigned as comms director. Mm-hmm. And none of the candidates that they've interviewed or tried to interview, and there's at least 6 of them, none of them want the job.
Yeah. Well,
I wonder why that is.
Don't know. I did see Scaramucci, I guess, over the weekend took time to denounce Nazis and Nazism, and can't figure out why the president wouldn't do it. He's a little baffled.
It's a no-brainer, but that's because, he can't bring himself to admit that Trump himself is a white supremacist, which is, by the way, the reason why Trump can't do it. But getting back to this Russia thing, so you have all these candidates here on the Democratic side. They give examples in this Politico article. In Thursday evening keynote addresses, former Missouri Secretary of State Jason Kandar, a popular fellow with the left, hit on voting rights. Tallahassee mayor and Florida gubernatorial candidate Andrew Gillum criticized current Governor Rick Scott for his ties to Trump.
Okay.
Former Maryland Representative Donna Edwards talked about winning back Obama voters who sat out the 2016 election. Not the ones who voted for Trump, but the ones who sat out. And Georgia gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams delivered a largely biographical speech. Paul Ryan challenger Randy Bryce, mustache guy.
Yes.
Talked about health care. Arizona Representative Ruben Gallego leaned on the imperative to develop a progressive agenda. Keith Ellison sat on a panel that touched on a right-wing smears and media failures piece. And the list goes on and on and on. They didn't make Russia the centerpiece. But, the delegates there did. If you talk about Russia, does John Ossoff win those 4 or 5 points? I don't think so. That district had a ceiling, said Mike Sarasso a party organizer and former senior staffer on the Bernie Sanders presidential campaign, referring to the Democrat who narrowly lost the Georgia special election. Even so, organizers universally agree that the topic so animates the Democratic base voters that the party cannot afford to take its foot off the gas pedal. So as you pointed out, David, this is one of those things where it's going to have to be Russia and whatever other issue you want to be working on here. And there's room for two things.
All right, then.
So that's the report from Netroots Nation. But Quinta Jurisic over at Lawfare had a really long, extensive, well-reported, asking lots of folks, various things. She's been tracking liberals and even further left than liberals and the intelligence community and their relationships with each other.
Okay.
And whether it's, looking at Intercept and Glenn Greenwald on the other hand, and looking at how liberals feel about the intelligence community exposing Trump-Russia ties, it's a rather complex relationship, and I think it's really worth this in-depth look. We don't have to go over the whole long thing on the show, but I just wanted to bring people's attention to this excellent article and have people give it a look. She writes, as Americans gathered to watch James Comey testify before the Senate Intelligence Committee, a meme emerged on certain corners of the left-leaning internet. People had a crush on the former FBI director. Not me. Comey still threw the election. I won't forgive him for that. It was his patriotism, his scrupulousness, his integrity that did it. Get you a man who loves you like Comey loves the FBI, wrote one commenter. Is Comey attractive, asked another, declared one. Comey should be the next bachelor. The trend may have started with Comey, but it hasn't ended with him. Earlier this month, Vogue reported that special counsel Robert Mueller, too, has been transformed into an unlikely object of adoration. The point of these outbursts of affection, whether level or queasiness or amusement they might inspire, is not actually that anybody finds a former FBI director or the special counsel attractive. In the odd parlance of the internet, this kind of language is a way to express intense emotional involvement with an issue.
Okay. Well, that's true. And not that you guys should feel bad about yourselves. You're married.
The internet is ironic. And that's millennial humor, I'm told.
Yes. I think that's probably true.
Half jokingly, and with some degree of self-awareness, many people who profess their admiration are projecting their swirling anxiety and anticipation over the Russia investigation and the fate of the Trump presidency onto Mueller and Comey. Facetious admissions of crushes are only one manifestation of this emotional entanglement, and that's why Abby gets let out. Benjamin Wittes, who has been open about his friendship with Comey, has told me that his Twitter feed and email inbox have been flooded with expressions of support and appreciation for the former FBI director.
But no
Benjamin
love
Wittes
for him.
is the first one to point out, you're not going to like me after this because something else is going to come up and you're going to hate what I say. And I talk about that with Jen Rubin all the time, conservative blogger for the Washington Post. And I wrote her some months ago, it's going to be fun when we can get back to disagreeing, but right now we're not disagreeing on anything.
It happens from time to time. Like, say, I don't know, World War II, that was an interesting instance of getting together with people we'd otherwise be at odds with.
And it's okay. These are coalitions where Democrats were used to it. This is not a problem, and I don't find it, difficult to conceptualize. But even among the president's most aggressive opponents on the left, the admiration is far from universal, she points out. As the Democratic Party and more radical lefties grapple with the new shape of politics under the Trump administration, one of the fiercest debates is focused on how to approach the Russia investigation, whether it's an effective means by which to oppose the president and a worthwhile focus for the emotional energy of those adrift in Trump's America, or whether it's not. The FBI is not your friend, ran a headline in the far-left Jacobin magazine. This is going to be the Democrats' version of the Benghazi hearings, wrote a despondent commentator on a forum for fans of the popular left-wing podcast Chapo Trap House, who testified.
Okay.
You can look at the Young Turks and other examples of farther left, let's say, the Daily Kos to get an idea of what they're talking about here.
Right.
And I don't always listen to them because I don't always find them interesting. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But this is a nice review of all of that and the difference between, let's say, how the Daily Kos people feel about it and how the Chapo Trap House and Young Turks people feel about it. And if you're interested, it's a really, well reported piece about how those differences come to be and how you approach this.
I think that I am interested, and it gives me an entree to another topic that I'll discuss with Armando. But I do think there's some great lessons to be drawn from, say, the headlines. I mean, these are just snippets, so it's hard for me to judge exactly what they're talking about here. But the FBI is not your friend; it's the FBI. And for one thing, the FBI was just used very recently to screw you over very badly. It may end up rescuing the country in the end, but they're not your friend. They don't want to be your friend.
That's right.
Either.
It doesn't change who they are, and all you have to do is take out Comey or take out Mueller and stick in J. Edgar Hoover, and you get the picture.
Yes, and even if you stay with Mueller and or Comey or anybody that you think is your friend, they will remind you from time to time. If you have that discussion with them, they'll say, I appreciate your support, but I am not your friend. I am running the FBI. And if you run afoul of me for whatever reason, good or not in your mind, we'll be after you. We're the FBI. Right. We do that stuff. And that includes spying on you and surveilling you. That's their tools. So excellent reminder, and you'll get a lot of reminders of that from people who consider themselves this part of the left, but I don't necessarily think I'm not following when it gets to the point of, well, this will be the Democrats' version of the Benghazi hearings. It's not that they're not investigating anything that has, or that they're investigating something that has no value. That's a very distinct part of that part of the left. They have subsections just like everything else and different splinters, and that sounds like easier to dismiss as, I think you're going overboard here, than the Jacobin headline anyway.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, I think I'll end it there. So much to talk about, and you'll pick and choose, of course, what you want to cover from this point onward for the rest of the show. But housekeeping, so the rest of the week is going to be pre-recorded podcasts?
Yes, it is. I'll be hitting the road tomorrow morning. Some chance, I will hold out some hope of possibly bringing out a live show together on Monday from the road. We'll have to see how the internet the robustness of the internet connection is. I'm sure we would all enjoy that, and a good way to check in.
A week from today?
Yes.
Okay.
But in the
Otherwise,
meantime,
if that doesn't work, when are you back for live shows?
Then we would be doing Thursday live shows.
So it's all of this week and part of next week?
Yes, it is. I will update you in writing. How about that? And then you can track it that way, and I'll update the rest of you not in writing, because what good would that do?
Yeah, well, I just thought your listeners would like to know. Oh, yeah, I'd like to know too, but, that's fine. I can figure it out in the morning when I call in and see if I'm talking to myself or not.
There's more of them than there are of you, and I'll
this is true.
Address them directly so that we don't have a mob situation.
I just, want to emphasize the total thorough professionalism of this organization here and how David and I interact every morning. Which is, it's 9:00. What's up?
Yeah, right. There's no reason, by the way, for us to include necessarily the behind the scenes chatter during the breaks, because we just have it here. Oh, are we on much now? Yeah. Oh, okay. Well,
the ones we have actually on the live part are more interesting than the ones we have behind the break.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's true. We could liven that up some. And there have been some good suggestions where you can people say all the words that you censor otherwise. The things that you substitute just the initials for. You can say those.
I try not to, because I just, I talk the way I think and I think the way I talk. But I tell you, for those people who can't hear it or have it cut out, it's basically 2 minutes of the Abby story.
Yeah.
Whether or not I'm going to let my dog out, and what went down the street that made her bark during the show, and whether or not she wants to sing along to the music and all sorts of stuff like that.
Yeah, it's super exciting. I've included a break or two along the way, but I don't know if we're getting any value out of it. You're not missing anything, folks.
In any case, value or not, this is great work, and speaking with my friend David Waldman Kagro in the morning.
Sure.
And thanks so much for listening, folks. David's entitled to vacation. I hope he has a great time. And he'll be back with some podcasts while he's away, and we'll be back next week, either Monday or Thursday or something. We'll figure it out as we go along. Take care. Right. And remember, there's not two sides about Nazism. If you're a Nazi, you're bad. And it's that simple. I don't know why anybody would have trouble with it, but apparently our president does. Take care, and I'll talk to you at some point.
All right. Thanks very much, Greg. Look forward to getting back in touch with you again soon. As I mentioned, we'll have to kind of take the wait and see attitude on whether or not we're able to do a Monday live show. It may happen that it's something we can swing, but it's dependent on what we discover about the robustness of the internet connection when we arrive on Sunday. And of course, it'll be eclipse day too. So I don't know. I mean, that's not until the afternoon where I'm going. So we'll have the opportunity to do the show, but who knows what kind of traffic mess there may be out there. I keep reading more and more about how unprepared, and hearing more and more anyway. If I was reading it, I would have an article to share with you. But hearing more and more about how unprepared some of the towns in the path of totality may be, not quite sure who's going to arrive and for how long. I mean, we've made our plans, and certainly all the hotels are booked up, but for people who aren't necessarily planning to stay overnight, all of a sudden, these towns are going to be flooded with thousands of people coming in at the same time for the same event, and I guess I'm sure the towns hope taking off afterwards too. But I also read or heard about how many people, what percentage of the population of the United States lives within reasonable, what we consider reasonable driving distance of the path of totality. It's going to be really weird. Who was it that thought that that islands could possibly, was it one of the Democratic representatives, and I think maybe was it from Georgia? I'm blanking on the name, but who thought that maybe islands could flip over if too many people were on them. I mean, it could be an interesting thing to check in with him again and find out whether or not he thinks we could have some sort of seismic event by having some 60+% of the population suddenly shift to a 50 to 70 mile wide tract of land stretching from Oregon to South Carolina. What happens then? If we empty out all the rest of it, does it all rise? Are we going to step on a seam and fold the United States into itself? I don't know. I know that won't happen, but I don't know what they think will happen in all of this. Anyway, it's an interesting topic to discuss too. Any of you have plans for viewing the eclipse? You can share them with us online here, and why not just use the KITM hashtag. Tell us what you're doing. I'm going to be going to South Carolina for this, and I imagine there's going to be a lot of you who are going to make an effort to move yourselves into the path of totality. If you haven't, and you can, you really should. I mean, it's pretty much a once in a lifetime kind of a thing, as I understand. I've been reading more and more. I have been reading articles about people's experience with totality, total eclipses in the past, and just sort of this otherworldly experience of sorts, and actually also have read a bunch about how people who have experienced a total eclipse once very frequently become eclipse chasers, and they can't get enough of it, and they do everything they can to travel around the world to put themselves in the path of another total eclipse at some point, and as many of them as they can, although they do say sometimes the experience is never the same as the first one. It should be a fantastic happening. In the meantime, I have looked it up. It was Hank Johnson, I think, that I was thinking of from Georgia, who made those comments, and I can't remember exactly how he put. I wonder if it's in Wikipedia. Does he have anything? Is that the kind of thing that would make Wikipedia? I mean, they have the most minute details. Yes, it is. Comments on, and it was Guam. I had not dared to hope. I thought he had been talking about Guam, but I thought maybe, all right, I think I just have Guam on the brain, which sounds like a terrible disease. But I'm sure it's not. I'm sure Guam is very nice for all of our Guamanian listeners. Do we have any? We used to have listeners in the Faroe Islands. I guess if we can have listeners there, we can have listeners in Guam too. That's at least the United States. So it made Wikipedia. Comments on Guam flipping over. During a House Armed Services Committee hearing on March 25th, 2010, concerning the U.S. military installation on the island of Guam, Johnson said to Admiral Robert F. Willard, commander of U.S. Pacific Command, and I'm sure he was just joking. That's a good excuse. If you weren't, you can go ahead and say it. It works for the president. Concerning his plan for health care reform. Oh, I'm sorry. I've jumped sections here. That doesn't seem right. Why would he be talking about health care reform and the island flipping over? No, when he spoke to Admiral Robert Willard, commander, U.S. Pacific Command, he said, "My fear is that the whole island will become so overly populated that it will tip over and capsize. To which Admiral Willard replied, and admirals know a thing or two about capsizing, "We don't anticipate that." Johnson later said that he was using a facetious metaphor. Just joking. It's fancy words for just joking. And I hope that's true. I cannot believe that anybody would reach adulthood and think that, but then again, I have seen Louis Gohmert is a living being and occupies a seat in the House of Representatives. Steve King has said things perhaps dumber than that. And, of course, Donald Trump purports to be president of the United States. And, anything goes at that point. All right. We're heading into, not quite there yet, but we've got another break, a short one to take at the top of the hour coming up in about, that's about 3 minutes away, our next break, after which we will have Armando join us. He can give us his report from on the ground at Netroots Nation. And there's a lot to round up from there, of course, some of which has national political import and some of which will be rather more picayune, but we'd like to hear it anyway because it's always nice to hear stories from people who have attended the latest Netroots Nation, and otherwise stories from anybody else too, which brings me to this. Let's see, a couple of comments we should pick up on from our listeners in the morning, going all the way back to the top of the show. Michael Musson commenting on the Charlottesville Nazi situation, that Trump clearly feels kinship with people with dumb haircuts, and that's likely true. I don't know if that's what's driving everything. Let's see. We also have Karen telling us that there's a spat between Sharpton and Deutsch on Morning Joe. Al Sharpton wouldn't call Donald Trump white supremacist because he didn't want the discussion to be about Trump versus Sharpton. Oh, that's interesting. And he's probably right about that. Had Sharpton said it, Trump would almost certainly have taken the opportunity to make it a Trump versus Sharpton fight. And anytime that you get Sharpton willing to not make a subject about him, that's a good day. Capitalize on that. Let him do it. Parlio commenting here, if Nazis are now acceptable, someone has a lot of explaining to do over the trillions spent fighting them in World War II. Yes, also a big problem. Let's see, an admission of a crush on Comey. I hadn't expected that one from But It's a Dry Heat, who you will find under the handle of Thread and Thumb on Twitter. A lot easier to find and spell out than But It's a Dry Heat, which, okay. And let's see, Justice commenting, Cenk at the Young Turks is backed by a right-wing think tank, by think tank money, and Daily Kos is not. Well, I knew about the Daily Kos not being backed by right-wing think tank money, but I think I need more information on Cenk and the Young Turks having that be the case. That's an interesting thing to point out. But we'll have to wait until we're back from our next break, which begins shortly. And so let's you can listen along behind the scenes as I get things revved up for our break. We'll play a little musical bed underneath if I can. Here we go. Ooh, some dramatic music at that. As I mentioned, we'll be breaking for just a moment for station identification so our friends in Rochester can let you know who you're listening to, and we'll be back talking to Armando after this. All right. Well, this brings us back from the break, and Armando, thanks very much for hanging on so diligently. so you followed directions so well. I said, hang on just a second. Right. Okay. Well, just make sure that Armando is there. I'll just double check with him. And then I probably ruined the break that way.
No, I think it worked, right?
Okay, I think so. Good morning, everybody. We are here with Armando, who joins us again, having been on the ground, as they say, at Netroots Nation.
I was.
How was it? I mean,
fun.
just generally speaking, it's always fun, yeah.
It was very fun, first of all.
Yes.
Good to catch up with a lot of people. I don't want to name names because then I'll forget people I did meet and they'll be offended.
I see.
I'm sure because they're listening. But it was a lot of people. It was a lot of fun. And it was pretty invigorating, I thought. I didn't go to everything. As you know, when I first got there, I was sort of discombobulated. But I sort of got my bearings and attended a few interesting conferences. I went to Elizabeth Warren's speech, which really impressed me. I thought it was fantastic. A real tour de force of what coalition politics means. It's inspired me to write again, so I'm probably going to write something for Sunday. So I hope that people find it interesting. The take I have. I was struck by the unity, really, which doesn't come across on Twitter as well. Yeah. I won't mention one name.
Yes.
Because people who are at Daily Kos, at any rate, is maybe not Rochester and in D.C. generally, but people who go to Daily Kos know that I've had my little running dispute with Egberto Willis. And we talked it out and we hugged it out, and I think we understand each other better.
That is good. That's one of the values of meeting face to face, and one of the reasons they have these things, among others. But that's true. Meeting face to face does tend to change relationships online, and it's a good thing. It almost
and you can
never
talk a
makes
little
it
more
worse.
at length generally. I mean, even in a comment at a blog, I guess you could go on and on and on, but it's still you don't get the full.
Yeah, there's all sorts of visual cues and tone cues and visual cues and
the whole thing.
The fact that you're within striking distance.
Right. Bill in Portland, Maine, I will mention because he looked terrific after his health battles. Michael, his partner.
Thanks, Obama.
And he looked, they looked happy and everything seemed to be much better for him. So that's always good to know. Bill was his usual funny self because Bill is a very funny guy in person, people, if you ever get that opportunity.
Yes, and at a distance as well. As it happens.
And so it was all in all quite a good event. It had its moments.
Yes. So I've heard.
There was one really kind of interesting to me. I didn't know the background. Apparently, in Georgia, there's a governor's race coming up. And frankly, I had heard of Stacey Abrams, the African-American legislator who had announced, and everybody's very excited about her. But there was another candidate who came on Saturday morning at one of the plenary sessions, where everybody's there. And she's running too, and she was
same seat.
A real Georgia girl. I don't know her politics at all. Democrat, I'm sure she's somewhere within the realm of what a Democrat is. But there was a lot of pushback to her, and there was a protest. It was exciting, and
I heard about this.
It was a little chaotic, but I guess I give people credit for caring that much on both sides.
That's it. Wow! It was just a good statement until you said both sides.
Okay. What I meant both
Explain
sides.
Yourself. Yes.
Just to explain to both sides of whatever it is that Stacey Evans is
both sides of Democrats.
Bad at. I don't know. David, as I sit here today, I
actually
don't even know what the dispute's about, but I'm sure it's something important. And the passion was inspiring, even in that setting.
That is interesting. I mean, we've had it's like incidents we've had before, but it hasn't blown itself up to the same proportions. And I guess interestingly, we kind of have become. I don't want to say we've become used to it because it will scare politicians away from attending, perhaps. But it's a reality, and it happens, and it's good training for anybody. If you're going to run for office, you're going to see this.
Yeah, think of it as a test run. I mean, Netroots Nation gets a lot of attention, and the Warren speech was covered in many forums, including a terrible story about it in the New York Times, as usual. Yeah, it's just they don't get it. But but Dave Weigel's going to write something I think that will really capture what I think.
He's been there a number of times.
Course,
he gets it.
I'll write the definitive piece for Sunday.
Excellent. Well, that's why we should keep it in-house. I say the definitive piece about, well, it's not in-house anymore and hasn't been for like a decade that it was that closely affiliated with Daily Kos, but, we like to think of it that way anyway. Still think of it as home.
It is very much, and I was a bit surprised. I mean, I hadn't gone in a few years,
Mm-hmm.
and I know you and I went together in 2012. We were launching the radio show really right about that time, and that was Daily Kos, homecoming, so to speak. It still had a lot of that feel. It really it's bigger. It's certainly bigger, but it still has that feel.
Okay. Well, I will accept it. There's no sense in which I am upset about that.
That's my experience.
I'm sure everybody sees it differently. Yeah,
yes,
and
that's true.
You can make there's a lot of room to make your own experience there. That's for sure. I'd like to find out more about what the protest was about, but that's background.
I don't, and it's very local. Obviously, it was in Atlanta, so that really made it a big moment, I suppose, for people very immersed in Georgia politics, which I must confess I'm not. Again, the passion was chaotic, but it interesting and inspiring. I mean,
all right.
You're right. Politicians got to get used to, tough crowds and tough situations. And
if you see an issue there and you see the rest,
really
right. And for the rest of us, if you see an issue there because you're involved locally and understand what the issues are, and you see the rest of your progressive family walking around unaware of what it is, how else are you going to get us to know? Writing blog post? Well, I might skip it. What would happen if I just said I don't know anything about Georgia politics and I need to read about something else so I can get ready for the show? Well, now I know. Well, now at least there's a flag there and I can go back and look. So, all right. But other things.
Now that we've touched on this the notion of insularity and figurative provincialism, I'm going to be a little provincial about our own website, and a bit of a controversy that spilled out into Twitter yesterday and is still brewing or raging, as you would probably be the better word, at the website, and it involves me, but it also involves Marcos, which makes it bigger, of course, much bigger. And Marcos and I had.
And Donald Trump says it also involves him.
Using the phrase alt-left for
what?
Oh,
okay, yes.
Alt-left. For what he and I see, it's a question of how you define it. I don't define them as neo-Nazis of the left or Stalinists or anything like that.
No, that's the danger.
And I've tried to define it. Go ahead, Dave.
Oh, I was going to say, I mean, I don't know. I shouldn't interrupt at this point, but I was going to say that that's the danger of using it. From what I've been able to tell from the outside is obviously offensive to people who say, you know what, it gives license to, in particular, to both sidesers in the traditional and mainstream media to say, oh, well, they're two sides of the same coin and they're not. And even people who use the term don't believe it. And I guess I also will point out that there's plenty of people who now, I think, I haven't tracked it personally, but who occupy the same space as others who were willing, more than happy, to use the term to set themselves apart from the part of the progressive left with which they disagreed on some very fundamental points. And it has since, because of the continued slide into continued trajectory as deplorables, I guess the alt-right has taken, it's grown out of control, and they don't want the association or the comparison made just by using the alt tag. So some have changed their minds about it, but they make a good point, I think.
No,
but
I've ended up there this morning.
Okay.
I think my use is counterproductive, and I'm going to suspend saying it. But I do want to explain why I used it and why I got involved. And I think I dragged Marcos into it, which made it bigger, which, well, to the degree that I've got him in trouble, I apologize to him. But
it's you.
The framework for me, let me start with the framework. I'll start with the end first. And I think the Al Sharpton story you told before the break sort of connects to what I'm saying. So
right.
I'll go back to referencing that. Why isn't he calling Trump a white supremacist? Because then it'll be Trump versus Sharpton. He's right. Yeah. It's not that he doesn't think Trump is a white supremacist. It's just he doesn't want it to become about himself, which is, frankly, very mature, very prudent, and I don't disagree with Sharpton at all. I don't know why Donnie Deutsch was mad at him for making that choice. I think it's a wise choice by Sharpton. And that's why I've, in essence, got convinced not to use alt-left at this point in time, particularly after Charlottesville, because of what the alt-right now has come to mean in a writ large way. It's not, the mask, to the degree it existed or people wanted to give it credence as a mask, the mask of alt-right is off. It's white supremacy. Yeah. It's the Ku Klux Klan. It's Nazis. And Trump is, frankly, drowning with that right now. I think you and Greg identified that as an important moment, and I think it is. But I think it was also important to the question of alt-left. And I'll justify myself for what I did before a little bit by explaining my definition of it and why I used it before. To me, alt-left meant people who said, and I explained this on Twitter if you want to read a lot of tweets about it. I explained it as, to me, it was people who argued and stated and acted as if there was no difference there would be no difference if Trump or Hillary were president. That
was largely a position taken before the election.
Before the election, this was during election behavior, and I think it spilled over afterwards. It also upset me. It's an ongoing fight I have with Greg. Fight in the family sense. It's a family fight. We all love each other, but I didn't agree with Greg's featuring of Chris Arnade and J.D. Vance and Selena Zito and all these economic anxiety people, because to me, it was the argument that rationalized Trump and de-emphasized the racism and bigotry and misogyny and unacceptableness, to invent a word. Unacceptability is the proper English word, so I'll go with that one, of Trump. To me, it's still scandalous that everybody in society who was a decent or pretends to be a decent person didn't say, whatever differences we have, we must stop Trump. I felt it was that kind of moment. And we did not rise to the occasion. None of us. We didn't. Our group, David, I think you were with me on that during the election, and certainly afterwards you've been like that. That, whatever our differences, Trump trumped it to pun the situation. We could have continued fighting after we stopped him. I mean, that's where we are now. And the thing about Charlottesville being an important moment is exactly that. It really is a time to choose. And I think that in many ways the alt-left of the time, I just used the term I promise not to use, formerly known as the alt-left.
Right. It's like getting used to not calling the Washington football team in the name.
We're too interested in telling us why we were all wrong. We who thought, we needed to rally around Clinton to stop Trump, were all wrong because we didn't understand the economic anxiety and we were too corporatist. We weren't strongly enough for single payer and $15, all these things. And it was, frankly, one corollary that was really, really infuriating was how we talked about Russia too much.
Yes.
Nobody cared about Russia.
You sort of touched on that a little here, too.
You did. And I think that all of the things that Trump had done up to now still hadn't shaken that approach. I will name a name. I will name Nina Turner, who refused to support or endorse Hillary Clinton against Donald Trump, who considered running as the vice presidential candidate on the Green Party ticket and was rewarded with this, frankly, inexcusable behavior by being named the head of our revolution. I think she discredits our revolution by being the head of it. She goes on TV all the time and kept spouting things. Now, her tune has changed since Charlottesville. She's been very much about the dreaded phrase identity politics, about white supremacy, about what Trump is, and how Trump is, frankly, the leader of the white racist movement in the United States, because that's what he is. The President of the United States doesn't say all the words that David Duke says or that Richard Spencer says or that Milo said, but he supports them all. He tacitly endorses them all. And his refusal to condemn them, even after Charlottesville has put everyone on the spot, from the media to the for shorthand, I'll use dirtbag left for now, until I can come up with something better. That's a phrase they've used themselves.
Yes, that's true.
Trap
So,
house
I guess
so
it's the
for
fair
now,
game.
that shouldn't be objectionable. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they just did not want to talk about what that meant. And what it meant that they did not see it as a sufficient condition to say, I'm going to put my differences aside with neoliberals and corporatist Dems and whoever else they were opposing, to say that's all true, but we have to stop Trump. You talked about World War II in a as a reference this morning to Greg's talk of coalition. I forget the exact context, but it's true.
Yeah, well, it's very similar, and that's I think of it all the time. Well, I don't know what comes to mind for me, because I don't know. I guess I work this way. Movie stuff, which isn't necessarily always reality, but I mean, the movie Patton certainly illustrated the inherent tensions. I mean, anybody who read history or took a history course and covered World War II, and I hope you did, because if you didn't, you got ripped off in your history course. It's a big part of history. But yeah, I mean, making common cause with the Soviet Union out of convenience, and then immediately, as soon as the threat that united them as allies in war was eradicated, hardliners on both sides immediately knew that the next stage of the conflict was going back to having that ongoing fight with the Soviet Union and international communism. Now, of course,
and what's really appropriate to your argument, I'm not comparing dirtbag left to Stalinists. They're not that.
No, but I see where you're going.
Don't send me letters or tweet at me saying how dare I compare them to Stalinists. I'm not. I'm actually comparing the alt-right to the Nazis. Because they compare themselves to the Nazis.
Yes, by dressing like Nazis and saying Nazi-ish things, or occasionally
and
saying, "Yeah, I'm a
Nazi
Nazi."
Tattoos and all the things that they
Yes.
do. You know, the funny story, I think Greg mentioned it, was, the American doing the Heil Hitler thing in Dusseldorf, and German came up and punched him in the face. I mean, Germany,
They're still tough, those
and rightly
Germans.
so, wears that hair shirt and will wear it for another century, almost certainly, at least, because what happened was unspeakable. But again, Trump isn't different enough from that for me to say, well, you can't. Godwin himself, as you know, said, "Go ahead, call them Nazis."
Yes. Okay. Well, we have his permission now. Like the repeal, in part anyway, of the Goldwater rule, the Godwin law now repealed as well, in part. Godwin,
the
I
Godwin
think,
law has been repealed.
Yes, I don't know why
it
he's
has
the
to be
authority
repealed.
on it.
Trump this morning denounced the CEO of Merck, Big Pharma,
Yes.
who resigned from his manufacturing council because of Trump's reaction to the Charlottesville situation. The CEO of Merck happens to be an African American.
Yes, that is true too.
Trump took 50 minutes from the moment that news broke to denounce that man.
Yes,
It's been
because
3 days.
Yeah.
And he hasn't denounced the Nazis.
Right. Now, to be clear about it, he took 50 minutes to do it, not because he was considering his words carefully, but because that's how long it took Fox to tell him to find the news itself and say, "Oh, the CEO of Merck resigned from the." Oh, that's awful. It's bad news, and he's black. Oh, now it's terrible.
Yeah, I mean, if you looked at the tweet, it's gibberish in many ways, which
Most
is
of them
not
are.
unusual for a Trump tweet, but he certainly
any
wasn't a long considered tweet. It has all caps and all kinds of
yes
Trumpisms.
So now the guy was an ally because he was a part of this, what, the manufacturers, advisory group or something. But now that he's resigned and is on the other side, he's a terrible pharma dude, and he's ripping off America with his high pharmaceutical prices.
He was a great American business leader while Trump could point to him being on his manufacturing council. Now he's destroying the American way of life,
right?
Whatever.
But specifically Trump's. Because he's ripping people. He can now that he's off the council, he can go back to ripping off the American people with high pharmaceutical prices. And note for the record that not one price of one pharmaceutical product from Merck has changed in that 50 minutes.
But more interestingly, in the last 6 months, Donald Trump has done not one thing to cause Merck to lower its prices.
They joined the council so that they wouldn't have to.
Exactly.
All right.
And in that sense, I think it's an interesting proposition for the CEO of Merck. But, to screw Merck, Trump would have to screw all farmers. You can't build a tainter.
Mm-hmm.
You can't pass a law. Well, not that the Republican Congress would do that anyway. And
because they wouldn't be able to put the votes together.
Yes.
They would want to, and they would all be angry that the bill wasn't stronger, but yes.
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny, in many ways, I wonder what Mitch McConnell's thinking today, given that he was under bombardment by Trump last week. And today, frankly, Trump needs at least the tacit acceptance of Republicans in Congress on the Charlottesville thing. I think I'll go back to you and Greg saying this is an important moment. And, Trump's being Trump, and it's not working. I watched for the first time in a few days the morning shows, and they were blistering him with the racist word. Eugene Robinson said he's a racist. Good for Eugene. I mean, if Joe Scarborough, who was not there today, was there, I don't know that he would have said it because, Joe Scarborough.
Yeah.
But, and Chris Cuomo was quite definitive on this. There was no mealy mouth. He said, alt-right, we call them alt-right, but we shouldn't. They're white nationalists. Those were the words of Chris Cuomo. I mean, it would have been nice if you said them in 2016, but okay. At least you're saying it now. There has been a sea change in many ways. Just from Friday afternoon, I was at Netroots Nation that day, and Charlottesville was just breaking. Remember, that was just the vigil, the scary images of the vigil with the tiki torches.
Yes,
and it was bad, but it wasn't. Nobody had died yet.
Right.
People hadn't been injured yet. And the true scope of what had happened was just coming out on Saturday. And by then, it's just, it's not going away anytime soon. It doesn't seem to me, unless, what will it take? A wag the dog, frankly, say a military strike on North Korea. Don't put Trump past it. That's a real possibility.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I mean, and it's always a real possibility. Of course, it's always out there. But remember, if you want the best predictor of what ridiculous thing he's actually going to do next, if you think that's a little bit too ridiculous, please keep in mind, this won't make any difference in whether or not he does anything, but he has tweeted about how awful that would be in the past, which is our best indicator that he plans to do that as president in the future. Everything is about projection with him, and we had even another example this morning as I was flipping through the Twitter chatter and saw Paul Krugman's latest, which was carrying the title of what to do. What do you do when the president is un-American? And it occurred to me as we're reading through and reading his take on these things that this is something. Another one of those things that this now explains it again. When Trump was railing all the time about how Obama was somehow not really American at heart. That too was projection. He knew already he wasn't really American at heart. He was in the pockets of the Russians and in their employ for a decade prior to his run for election. And true to form, he shows up here and says, but because I'm also not American, it's important to me to make sure you all know, what about all those other people who aren't American? Just like his White House's response to Charlottesville. What do you say about this murder? Well, what about how bad the left is? Okay, that's not an answer.
Well, that's the Fox line. It's actually pretty interesting. We're going to hear about Robert Byrd a lot, I think, this week.
I'm sorry, we'll be hearing a lot about...
We're going to hear a lot about Robert Byrd this week.
Oh, yeah, that's probably a good guess. He was in the Klan. He's dead. So we're working on you next.
He was in the Klan in 1935.
Yeah. And although, that's not a bad answer for people. Well, Robert Byrd was in the Klan. I know, and he's dead. And as soon as you're dead, I'll be fine with you too.
Yeah,
like that?
I won't bring up that you were.
Yeah, I'll almost never talk about you once you're dead. Why don't you get started?
Exactly.
You want me to stop talking about you?
But they haven't figured it out yet. And the reason I think they're coming up with these alternate strategies is Trump is not going to denounce the Nazis. Personally.
No.
Everyone, even Jeff Sessions denounced the Nazis this morning.
And that's nice.
He's opening a, quote, civil rights investigation, whatever that means. But
for Jeff Sessions,
kids in Germany denounced the Nazis. And all these things are happening, but I just predict Trump will not say the words.
He may spend some time exploring or having people explore for him some alternative wording. What can I say that won't make them mad? But it comes back to the basic. He's been explicit about this. He told us what the case was with Russia and Putin. Why should I say anything bad about it? He says nice things about me. What am I going to do? Say something bad about a guy who says nice things about me? No, of course not. And well, they call Trump their God Emperor. What more could he ask for? He's not going to want to alienate them, even though it's ridiculous. And honestly, he could have looked brilliant, I think, in a manner of speaking.
Oh my God! Can you imagine the pivot stories he could have had?
Yeah, if he had just simply said what I think would have been viewed as eminently sensible and American thing to do, would be to have said, you know what, with these torches, stop it. You look ridiculous. Cut it out, guys. And that would have been enough, and he would have bounced. We got to take our break, and we'll be right back after this. All right, we are back from the break and still with Armando here and still continuing our discussion of Charlottesville and everything, all the repercussions of it. Okay, where we are.
Can I put a bow on my outlet thing? Because I sort of previewed it at the start, but I do think, I've laid out my defense. It's still, because I'm like Trump. I can never give you a full-blown mea culpa. I always have to justify. I gave my justifications for why I did it, and I'll explain to you.
We should be returning to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to just tell you why I'm not going to use it anymore. I actually had a interesting discussion online with Daily Kos alumnus Josie Duffy Rice, and she convinced me. Look, there's lots of things that people have done wrong.
Yes.
But now's now. It's bigger than that. Don't let your own language be used against what you want to have happen. And that struck home with me. I was being rancorous and personal about it, and not really thinking, well, how does this help what I want to happen? Because at this point it doesn't.
Yeah.
And that convinced me. I said, well, let me take my own advice to everybody else and think of it from a bigger perspective. And thinking of it from a bigger perspective, I see that it's just counterproductive. It's particularly in light of the actual violence that happened in Charlottesville.
Yeah.
I do more harm than good if I do any good by using the term. So I am suspending my use of it.
Well, I think I'm largely in agreement with that, and I suspected when I got wind of what was going on, and I only got wind of it really via Twitter, as I get wind of everything else. The initial reaction I could anticipate, just as would happen probably with me, is at first, you bristle at getting upbraided about this thing and say, well, come on, that's a term that I know plenty of people in that faction who have used that term, and now all of a sudden it's being turned against me. But, with a little distance and a little thought, I think I'd come to the same conclusion. I was wondering whether that happened and what the role was, if any, between you and Marcos, because I did see, really right about the time that I began to see people saying, we really have to make sure we abandon the use of and ban, essentially, from our own usage, the term. And not long after that, I saw that people were retweeting Marcos's use of it. And this is something that happens quite frequently. But I wondered whether maybe he was caught up, perhaps, in what was going on around him. Because being at Netroots Nation is being in a little bit of a bubble. You don't quite monitor national happenings in the same way. Everybody's connected, of course, but you're not at your desk monitoring every channel. You're talking with people or having lunch, and you miss important developments. And I thought he maybe wasn't getting the word about what people were talking about with this term, and then blurted it out in the middle. And, he, like us, is also likely to bristle at that criticism at first, though he's certainly had plenty of experience in getting the criticism. But it hasn't changed the way people react.
I actually did not speak to him, but we've known Marcos, it seems like forever now, but it's certainly been, 13, 14 years. Mm-hmm. Marcos and I are both kind of hot-headed about it. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to create a cultural stereotype because we're both Latino. I just think they're very calm Latinos, too. Marcos and I are just not of that variety.
Yes.
And his use of it was similar to mine previously, so we were, I guess we were defensive, saying, no, that's not what we meant.
Yeah.
And you know what? It doesn't matter what we meant. It took me all day to get there. Did I spur him on? I think I did. And to degree, as I said, to degree I got him in any trouble, put him in a place that maybe he shouldn't have been. And I don't know that he shouldn't have been. I think the discussion yesterday was worth having, because remember, there were people who were saying those things. I didn't make that up during the election. Nina Turner did not support Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump.
Sure. But
she
we've been
did
over
say,
this.
Those things. And frankly, Joe Biden, and I don't want to get back defensive about it, but I do think that let's separate what I should do going forward with what I did back then, because I still think that both Marcus and I have very defensible positions. I think even honorable positions. But it doesn't matter what our honor says. This isn't about our honor. It's about getting what's right done. And both of us, I don't know if he's taken the vow I just did. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. But from my own perspective, where we are now, it's not useful, it's counterproductive, and I'm not going to do it anymore.
All right.
At least for the time being.
Well, we all are, to the extent that anybody ever wonders, well, will it be Daily Kos policy going forward? There's very little in the way of Daily Kos policy on most things. It's not to say that there doesn't exist a Daily Kos policy.
There is policy, but Marcos and I on Twitter don't establish it.
Yeah, well,
It could be that we violated it on many occasions on Twitter. Not advertently, we just don't. I know I don't follow policy that closely anymore, and I don't comment as much anymore to make sure I don't violate policy.
Where it exists, anyway. Yeah.
I mean, I should write more pieces, but I'm not sure I should comment more. I think that me commenting less. For those of you who are familiar with Daily Kos and me, know that probably me commenting a lot less is a good thing, both for myself
gives you a
and for the
chance
website.
to stay and consider what you're saying. So for anybody wondering, I have no idea where Marcos at the moment stands on this, or whether he will come to the same realization as Armando has. But and although there have been times where Marcos has announced some kind of draconian policy and had it stick, and people find themselves banned because of these policies. I mean, that sort of thing does happen. It always dismays me when it does. But no, there's no policy pronouncement. There's been no communication about it. The fact that Armando has come to this conclusion doesn't mean Marcos will or won't. But he very well may, because it seems like the sort of thing that he'd come to realize in the same way that Armando did.
I suspect he might have his same evolution on going forward on this as me, but don't hold me to it. Marcos,
likewise,
Marcos is Marcos. If you know him, you know he will do what he thinks is right for himself. I mean, that's just the way he operates, and frankly,
it's the way people
can infuriate you. It can outrage you, but when you put the whole body of work together, you should be happy that's how he operates, because he'll make things happen that would not happen if he wasn't that way. So good thing.
I will also say that policy-wise, the very last thing I can virtually promise you that the last thing on Marcos's mind, I don't know always what's there, but what I can promise you is there hasn't been, and I don't think there ever would be, an attempt to say, hey, you know what? Daily Kos Radio now has to adopt this policy. He first of all, I think it'd be a stretch to guess that he remembers that there is a Daily Kos Radio program.
No, he knows. That's not fair. Him and Will, I actually had a good conversation with Will about Daily Kos Radio.
Not that I think they're doing anything on purpose he's just a busy guy, and he's West Coast.
But it's not the top of his list.
Right. No, it would never occur to him, for instance, if he were to decide one way or the other about the use of the term alt-left, the idea that there would then be some follow-up memo like, okay, Daily Kos Radio, from now on the air, that doesn't happen. He's been I joke about his not remembering it, because how hands-off is he about like what gets said on the air? I've never heard a word of any written, spoken, tweeted, or otherwise about what should or shouldn't be on the air at Daily Kos Radio. So we enjoy a tremendous amount of independence, because that's sort of the way we've always handled the writing at the front page. There are a couple of things where we say, all right, well, let's make sure we give some coverage to this or that because it's an editorial decision. But in terms of policy, other than wild conspiracy theories and 9/11 was an inside job stuff, I can't think of much else.
That got banned early on, and and you're right. I will say the spectrum of ideological opinions run the gamut from, I'll pick Egberto, who I talked about it, who I think I disagree with on virtually everything in terms of political tactics. I'm sure we agree mostly on objectives, to, I don't know, me. on the other spectrum, but and all in between. It's he's never told people what to think or what they can write about, other than those things that you've identified. No crazy conspiracy theories. We're not Louise mentioning Daily Kos. Bush didn't do 9/11. Ohio wasn't hacked by Diebold. Right. The London attacks weren't CIA or whatever that particular theory was at the time. I forget. But other than that, the spectrum of what we can argue, we're a big tent at Daily Kos in that sense, both on the front page and, of course, in the membership. I mean, let's put it this way, in terms of the community. One of the diaries about this, this dirtbag left, my new term, or their new term, business, has been excoriating Marcos personally in the most obnoxious terms. I think they've gone overboard. I actually think someone should step in and say, hey, all right, I disagree with them, but you guys are going too far. But even then, Marcos is like, you can write whatever you want within some fairly broad lines.
Yeah. I wonder whether, I don't know, but I wouldn't doubt that sometimes this stuff is unconscious or less than conscious anyway. But my guess offhand, I'm sure there are actual ideological disagreements from time to time, but it's fantastic marketing if you're a startup operation of the sort that Chapo Trap House is. And they've grown considerably to, well beyond our popularity, certainly. But it's good marketing to have a fight like that. Yeah. And Marcos makes a good target because of the primary election fights. And it's great marketing to bash them because everybody knows who you're talking about, and largely their audience will be like, yeah, I felt that too. I guess I suppose if I were a more savvy marketer, I would say, well, okay, maybe Chapo Trap House bashing is the way to grow our show, but I don't think so. I don't think there's anything savvy about that. Maybe.
It's not in us. I'll bash them occasionally. I'm just not that interested in them.
I don't know what they say.
One way or the other.
I couldn't fairly do it, but I could unfairly do it. I'm willing to do that. Does it mean we grow? Do we have more listeners? Do we have more supporters? The hell with those bastards then. I got no idea. But I don't feel the primary politics that deeply.
I have a joke ready. Let me launch it.
Yes.
Daily Kos is and has always been the Yogi Berra joke. Nobody goes there anymore. It's too crowded.
Yes.
Because you remember everybody boycotts it, but somehow everybody ends up coming back somehow.
That's
Including
true.
myself, by the way.
That also true. I think if there's a lesson that these sorts of fights have taught Marcos, it's that even when it seems that dark, for whatever reason, traffic always ends up increasing after a boycott, exodus, purge, however you want to describe it. It's a cyclical thing. And we go through it, like they said, it's like the Godfather thing, right? These things got to happen every 5 years or so.
Every 5 years or so.
Whatever the numbers were.
Yes. See, that's a good one.
Yeah. Well,
yes, we need one of those. We got to hit the mattresses again.
That's everybody loves talking about the mattress thing. So I don't know. It's very in vogue to talk about going to the mattresses.
Going to the mattresses.
Let's see. I wandered around.
I think I used that back in the Supreme Court fights. We're going to the mattresses.
Right.
Filibuster.
Yeah.
But that's the story of alt left, at least in short form.
Okay.
Now, for the time being, dirtbag left, but I don't know that I'm going to write about them that much. I do want to commend a lot of them.
All right.
For basically stepping up here. They're talking, much to their surprise, I imagine, white supremacy and identity politics and deplorables, a lot of things that they thought were not quite as important during the election and the immediate aftermath. But as I say, the moment is such. The important moment that you and Greg identified in the first hour of the show is reflected across the different mediums, the media, the mainstream media, the lamestream media, if you will.
Yeah.
Of course, us who've been frightened to death of Trump since he came down that escalator.
Yeah.
In fact, Brian, I'll tell you. Let me shift gears. And Brian Stelter, I believe, no, it was Sam Stein, who tweeted out that this morning show's talked about Trump's mental deterioration today.
Yes, I saw that.
And he says, well, that doesn't generally happen. And it struck me, yeah, you're right, it doesn't generally happen. But anybody who saw him, and it's not deterioration from the summer of 2015 to now. It's deterioration from 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And it was apparent for the last 2 years. But Charlottesville seems to have opened the ability to speak forthrightly about what Trump is, what his condition is. And I wonder, Russia has opened that door too. Trump opened the Russian door in many ways. The Comey firing, of course, was the floodgate on that. Oh, and by the way, the one thing that's interesting about Russia during this time frame, who's not really getting bogged down or distracted by Chapo Trap House or alt left or what did Mike Pence say? It's a guy named Robert Mueller and his staff of attorneys.
Yes,
they're still doing their work. A story little noted this weekend was that he's asked to interview White House officials for his investigation.
Yes, that's true, and I have mixed feelings about it. I mean, the Mueller investigation got brought up earlier with Greg, sort of in the context of, maybe Trump is creating more controversy in order to distract from it. But I feel like we're at the stage both of the public story and the behind the scenes investigation where I think Mueller actually benefits from having the spotlight off of him. Because as people if you sit and wait and refresh your news every second, waiting for an update as though it were, whether Twitter or from back in the day, Drudge, even though he rarely updated for more often than an hour or two in between. But yeah, if you're waiting for results to come out of that investigation, this is going to be a slow moving thing. But when there are movements, they are big movements. And to the extent that people aren't refreshing their browsers every minute looking for something out of Mueller's investigation, but just letting them do the work, I feel like they're just as happy. The work gets done one way or the other. It doesn't change. It's just the public perception of their progress is better. When you are distracted and then you remember that Mueller is doing this work because he breaks some big news or people get some big scoop out of the investigation, it's that much more impactful, I think.
Oh, I think so too. And remember this type of Charlottesville story is it's important, and it's not as Dinesh D'Souza posited this weekend. It wasn't some staged drama.
Oh,
it was a thing that happened, and a thing that the Klan and what was it? What was that fellow's name who got chased from in front of City Hall? The guy Kessler, I think his name was.
Yeah, I don't remember actually. That's a good thing. I don't remember.
Did
He's
you see
the organizer.
The video of him being
yes, I did.
From his press conference?
I did, and that's another sort of source of controversy too. Another splinter point. Well, a division point inside of the left. I don't know how serious it is, but the question of I mean, I saw it. And I was a little hesitant to retweet it because of the comment that was accompanying it was, this needs to happen over and over everywhere. And I said, this is going to rub people the wrong way, but I'm kind of okay with it.
Everywhere. But the guy holds a press conference at City Hall the day after the incident. I think what happened was beautiful.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't happen every time. The moment was right for that moment.
That is true. So I was a little hesitant because of that, and I was like, well, I don't want to overstate the case here, but that sort of raised the issue of, I got some pushback like, what was it? Oh, this isn't how we win. You got to use nonviolent responses, and of course,
violent.
Well, there was a mix of responses to his to the press conference. And so it's difficult to label it as one or the other, really. I mean, there was, of course,
that's actually kind of a remarkable take. can I take a minute?
Yeah.
To
Well,
discuss
say we have 10. So.
At least as I saw the video.
Yeah.
He's up there doing his little song and dance, and guys come right to his face.
Yes.
And start screaming at him.
Yes. Right.
Right?
Yes.
Nobody touched him. If he
at
wanted
that
to,
point.
he could have stood right there, or he could have taken a step back, or he could have done any number of things.
Yes, it was a mixed bag, that
All
video,
right?
because...
If that offended you, when
Yes.
done to a Nazi, then how is it possible to say that what happened to Stacey Evans, remember the story I told you about at Netroots Nation, being, basically harangued and shouted at. I mean, they were in her face, but they were 5 feet away from her.
Yeah.
With signs.
It was
and
meant to
didn't
shut her
let
down.
Speak. And at the event, everybody said that was great. He's
Well,
a
we are used to
Democrat.
it.
He's not a Nazi.
That's true.
How come that's okay there, but it's not okay to a Nazi?
I don't know.
I see your point about every time. I get that. There's moments.
Yeah, but I will.
And I see you're right, but that particular time, that's how we.
Yeah.
I don't follow that.
What I'll say is the video, the full video, and I mean, I guess it depends on what version you see of it. I've only seen the one. And did you see the video?
I did.
Okay, and did you see?
Maybe I saw one where nothing bad happened, other than
maybe
the guy getting
how does
shouted
it?
at
How does your?
from
Okay, how does your video end? What's the last?
him running through the bushes?
Okay, all right. So there's a little bit more, in which there's physical contact.
Oh, well, that went too far.
Okay. All right, so there we go. So then it was some
I'll always
pushback,
stop
like, well,
there.
let's not, it's a Nazi punching question again.
No, I'm not for Nazi punching. I've been pretty clear on that.
Okay, so there you go. Now it becomes clearer for you. So there was, I'm just bringing out that there's still tension between people who say, well, it can never be like this because we have to be entirely nonviolent. This gives the alt-right the opportunity to say the left is violent, or either the left is violent too, or only the left is violent. Although I will have to point out, they say that regardless whether we're violent or not. I mean, there's a stack of books now that say, Nazis were liberals. So even as they march around in Nazi uniforms, I
guess I didn't even think about it in terms of whether it's good optics or whatever anybody wants to use as a phrase. I just think it's wrong. I mean,
but I do think that
I don't think we use violence. I think that's not a democracy.
Well,
I know that sounds maybe Pollyannish, but it's not.
I'm still I'm of two minds in this, and I appreciate both approaches, and I think probably the way I synthesize it in the end is to say that as others put it in the middle of this argument, and I didn't really engage in the argument, but I did watch it for a while, and I was included in it whether I liked it or not. There were points made about, for instance, somebody saying, well, this isn't how Dr. King fought for civil rights, and he was very clear on the need for nonviolence, and others pointed out, yes, on the other hand, there was a very big need for an opposite to be out there, in the sense, as they put it, Martin needed Malcolm in order to.
I've heard that argument.
Yeah, right, and I've heard the argument, and I'm not. It's how it was put. I'm not even super comfortable, addressing their legacies by first name. But okay.
But I would note one thing.
Yeah.
And I wonder if people.
I don't have a solution in this yet, but yeah.
Malcolm never became violent,
though. I guess that's true. I mean, he's famous for the imagery, certainly, and the rhetoric. But
the rhetoric was a defense, if necessary, of violence.
Yes. On the other hand,
and at the end of the day, isn't that what is the so-called reservation? Isn't that the Second Amendment argument at the end of the day? The right to revolt against unfair, as a practical matter, revolutions can't happen. They just do, or uprisings or insurrections and things like that. The question is it right when you still have ballot box opportunities? Now, when Malcolm was preaching or defending or arguing that it might be acceptable to be violent, the ballot box, and maybe we're headed back there. That could be one of the arguments here.
Yeah.
The ballot box really wasn't available. And that's what King and Lyndon Johnson worked hard
right.
for.
And that's relevant to where I finally came out in this. It was basically like, I can't settle this even for myself, so there's no chance I can settle it for all of the rest of you. But to compare it necessarily to say, well, this isn't how it happened in this movement. Well, we're talking about different opponents, different sides, a different time, a different context, different stakes. I don't know that we can necessarily say, well, this worked.
This is actually an interesting discussion, and I wonder do you think bringing, you remember Denise Oliver Vela? She was a young lord during the 60s. She lived the entire civil rights movement in that argument. Mm-hmm. I wonder if it would be worthwhile to have her on to sort of talk about that issue.
I think so. Although by the time I get to do another live show, since I'm going to be taking a vacation.
Tell me about that. You're about to go.
We're going down for the eclipse down to South Carolina, but taking our time about getting there. But this will be our last guaranteed live show before next Thursday, at which point we will definitely return live. Although I'm hoping,
days from today.
Right, and I'm hoping that we may be able to pull one off on Monday. But it's certainly something I want to discuss with her and follow. I have a feeling she'll, A, already is having that discussion. B, will probably be publishing her written comments on it as we speak. So I will keep a close eye on that. But it was a very interesting topic. I cannot settle it, and I basically had to, it was foolish, but I kind of had to leave it at, you know what? I don't know. I don't know what will work. You guys say this will, and you guys say that will, and I don't know. Nothing works. Nothing's normal. How do I decide what used to work when things were supposedly normal for white people? They were normal. They weren't normal for anybody else. Now this is not normal. It's never been normal for some people. It's always crazy. So who knows? I guess we ought to, take their pulse on what they think of it. They've been through this before because it never stopped. So. You're right. I need to turn to people like Denise on this. And,
I just think her historical experience with the question would be of real interest.
It makes sense.
I'm going to step aside and let you close up your 3 minutes.
I will. Thanks very much.
Publicly offer to you if there's some way I can help you do podcasts. I'd be happy to try.
I will give it a shot.
In terms
see if I can think it up.
Talking about something or other, if you need, if you feel like you need something.
Sure thing. Always the case. Thanks, Armando. Thanks for your report.
Have a great trip to South Carolina and enjoy the eclipse.
Yes.
Hopefully the sun comes back.
Right. Yeah. We'll see.
Okay.
Might take it away forever.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, Armando. And, it's certainly a better idea for us to turn to Denise and others than for a bunch of white guys on Twitter to talk about, Martin needed Malcolm. I'm so uncomfortable at that point. Certainly there are people more versed in what that fight was like and what lessons, if any, we can draw from it. I am at the point where it's possible just to have to say there's no lessons to be drawn because this is not like anything we've ever faced before. There are going to be a few parallels, but beyond that, I don't know. Anyway, it is time for me to hand the microphone over for even longer than I really want to do, but just for the day anyway, to the guys on the after show. Batting cleanup, addressing some of the same issues from different angles and some of the things we may have missed along the way. What do we have by way of summary? I'll tell you. The president of Washington State University College Republicans, spotted marching with heavily armed racist white supremacists, the KKK and neo-Nazis in Charlottesville, says there is no proof he is a racist. A new generation of white supremacists emerges in Charlottesville in a White Lives Matter rally on 9/11. Great timing, of course, designed to be provocative. At Texas A&M will feature infamous neo-Nazi and trust fund baby Richard Spencer. And remember, by the way, open carry on campus at Texas A&M. That should be a really exciting situation, let's say.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
There's a little bit more coming up, too, on the last half of their show. They'll report that supposed Attorney General Jeff Sessions' objection to cannabis is racially motivated, and goldfish make alcohol to survive the winter without oxygen. And why wouldn't they? Good question. Stay tuned for the after show with Wink and Justice next.